Hi everyone. I can see a few people jumping on saying hi in the chat. Thanks for joining us today on this cold Thursday afternoon. My name's Megan Hickey. If you haven't met me, I'm a bariatric dietitian at Melbourne Weight Loss Solutions. And today we are lucky enough to have our clinic psychologist joining us, Dr. Melanie Strang, who is going to provide some insight into how a psychologist can help support you both before and after surgery. So thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And for our audience, we're definitely happy to accept questions as we're going through, so feel free to drop anything you're wanting to hear about in the chat box. But we'll start today with Melanie. If you could please just talk a bit about your role as a psychologist and what someone would gain by seeking psychology support in that before or after bariatric surgery setting.
Yeah, sure. So I guess when a client comes to see me initially, preoperatively, I would start with a bit of an assessment and evaluation. So looking for common mental health issues like depression or anxiety, maybe binge eating disorder or undiagnosed autism or ADHD. So it's really about getting to know the client and their history, where they've come from and why they've presented. So after that, it would be about understanding the client's relationship to food. So it might be about keeping a food diary, but in particular, looking at a client's thoughts and emotions that are related to when they feel that pull towards food. So often clients are using food as a way of coping with uncomfortable emotions. So once there's more of an understanding built around that, we'd maybe develop other coping strategies for clients to use other than turning to food to help with uncomfortable emotions. And in some clients, we might even start preoperatively to address underlying trauma that may be connecting with eating patterns. And then preoperatively as well, it would be common to consider what life will be like post-operatively, and potentially what issues might arise or challenges might arise after the operation. Then after surgery, I guess I would continue to help clients navigate their emotions and thoughts that might arise. There's often a grief response after surgery because a client may no longer have the same relationship to food that they used to have. And I guess any change is a loss. So we'd be looking at that, coping with grief. A lot of the work after surgery might be around helping a client motivate in terms of approaching their diet in a new way. And then maybe a little further down the track, if a client starts snacking or moving towards food again as a way of coping and possibly regaining any weight, then we would address that as well. And then also managing ongoing, more general issues that might not have anything to do with the surgery, like depression or anxiety, and then continued treatment around old trauma that we may have started preoperatively. And in a few clients, it might be around managing symptoms of body dysmorphia. It's not common. I don't see it very much, but this is when a client becomes preoccupied with a perceived flaw in their body. And that might be something that we would look at.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, thank you. That's a really great explanation. I think it obviously shows how broad the support can be depending on the individual person and what's going on for them at the time as well. And yeah, it's definitely something I see through my appointments when I'm touching base with patients in their early post-op dietitian appointments. Definitely that grieving their relationship with food is a common theme that comes up. So having the ability to obviously talk through those emotions with someone would be very, very beneficial in my perception. But another thing I thought would be great to talk through is, what's your opinion on how important it is for someone to have a list of non-weight goals when they're starting on a weight loss journey?
Yeah, I think each person's unique in terms of the goals that they have. If a client is solely focused on a number on the scale, then it does come to my attention as something to be curious about. So I tend to help clients build self-compassion around that focus on the number. Given that we're bombarded daily on social media with, images of the perfect woman or perfect man, and with that goes the ideal number on the scale, it's no wonder we develop sort of unhelpful beliefs around what that number represents in terms of our value. So I will encourage clients to reflect on why else they might be valuable as a person other than just a number on a scale. And so typically clients will mention things like family or friends. And so then we'll have a discussion around how weight loss might impact those areas of their life. And so a client might say something like if they lost weight, they'll be more mobile and be able to play with their kids or grandkids. And that would lead us to other reasons for weight loss, such as mobility and health. So we would sort of guide the conversation in that way.
Yeah. I think it's definitely quite an important conversation for patients overall to kind of, think about that bigger picture of how this journey is, improving their quality of life. So it's kind of more about, what they kind of consider as important for their future versus just the weight on the scale. So thank you for seeing your opinion on that as well. Also, something that would be quite probably relevant to a lot of patients that have had surgery would be, do you have any specific tools or strategies when you're kind of helping people unpack that root cause of non-hungry eating as well?
Yeah, so I tend to start with an intervention called acceptance and commitment therapy. Or ACT for short. ACT is a form of therapy that helps people understand their thoughts and emotions, and rather than buying into thoughts or clinging to thoughts, teaching them how to be the watcher or the noticer of their thoughts and emotions. And it's also about choosing behaviours that are in line with one's values. So I'll usually start by exploring thoughts and emotions that are present just before a client is drawn towards food. With emotions in particular, I help clients understand that food can be a way of suppressing uncomfortable emotions, so that the client is not using food because they're hungry, but it's a way of coping with that uncomfortable emotion. And then I use a bit of imagery to explain what I mean. So I get clients to imagine, these big inflatable balls that go in the swimming pool. And if that ball were to represent all the uncomfortable emotions that people have, what a lot of people do is they're pushing that ball under the water all day long by maybe using food or alcohol or overworking, or other people are clinging to the ball, so they hold it in front of them. They can't see past it. And what acceptance and commitment therapy is about, it's about understanding that you want to relate to the ball differently. You want to have it bobbing next to you in the water. So your job, your new mission is to be the watcher of these uncomfortable emotions rather than suppress them or cling to them. And with that, we then usually talk about what emotions are and how emotions are data, they're information. And if we're suppressing them and ignoring them, then we're losing really useful and important information that our body is trying to tell us. So, for example, anger, I would guide the patient by asking them to notice where they feel it in their body, to name it. They say name it to tame it, a bit cliched, but it's true. It gives you some power over it if you know what you're dealing with. So, I would help a client understand that anger means I'm not getting my needs met or a boundary has been crossed. And then because they've felt it in their body, they've given it a name, they've allowed themselves to watch it, to notice it, they can then move to a problem-solving stage. And if you imagine that anger was just suppressed with food, I guess, or with whatever, alcohol or anything, then you wouldn't get to that problem-solving stage. So you've missed all that important data by not allowing the emotion. And then So that's a bit of a summary in terms of looking at emotions, but we'd also be looking at thoughts, because thoughts are very important in terms of how they relate to our behaviours. And it's similar to emotions. It would be teaching the client how to be the watcher of their thoughts rather than suppress them or buy into them too much. They're just words, and often we believe our thoughts when they're not completely true. And so with thoughts as well, would use cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. And, people have all sorts of unhelpful or irrational thoughts. So some examples of those are that some clients have rules around food. An example of that might be bread is bad. So this thought might lead to a person restricting bread. And then because of the restriction, they get hungry and might have a binge. So it wasn't hunger the root cause, it was the thought that was the root cause of the hunger. Another type of unhelpful thought might be perfectionistic type thinking, such as, well, I've blown it now, so I may as well eat whatever I want today. And in that case, again, it wasn't hunger that led to the eating, but the unhelpful thought might have led to a feeling of shame. And so food was used to suppress the shame. So looking at how to manage that unhelpful thought might be a way around that. Other reasons for non-hunger eating. Sometimes I've found that ADHDers or autistic clients, it can be very helpful for them to make sense of some of their behaviours around food, because that can help build self-compassion rather than criticising themselves. So some of the behaviours I've noticed in neurodivergent clients would be, or not behaviours, but reasons behind non-hunger eating would be interoceptive difficulties. So interoception is the ability to notice internal sensations in the body, such as when you're feeling hungry or full. Sensory issues. So some neurodivergent clients need more stimulation or less, and so eating might be a form of stimulation. ADHDers can have hyperactive minds where it's just really hard to get rid of thoughts around food. People with ADHD can also have executive function difficulties, which can lead to difficulties around preparing, planning meals. And so, that can be left to the last minute until the hunger gets so big that maybe a food choice is made that they wouldn't otherwise have made. Other reasons for non-hunger may be related to trauma. And so I would help the client work through trauma. There's so many things that could have happened to people when they were young around food that is now impacting them now.
Yeah. That was a really great explanation. I think some of those really practical descriptions resonate really well with people, for sure. But yeah, it really highlights, I guess, the complexity when we think about non-hungry eating and our emotions as well, and how talking it through with someone would be really beneficial. Lovely. We've had some comments coming through on the chat. I'll just read a few out. So Christy mentioned, I read something yesterday about how ADHD impacts eating patterns too, with dopamine seeking and sensory factors. So you just described that a bit as well. Rachel asked that she is 4.5 years post-op and her surgeon never suggested psychology at that point in the process. Would you still feel it would still be helpful this far after surgery?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to say without knowing the person, but if it's related to eating, I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm a psychologist, so I think psychology is always helpful, even for the broader issues. If it's still not related to the surgery, that would still be helpful, I think. But yeah, definitely at any stage.
Yeah, and like she said, do you support people outside of AU, which I assume means Australia? Would you see international patients, or?
It's not something I generally do, mainly because of insurance issues. I don't think I'm sure to see patients outside of Australia.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for clarifying. Chloe said that she did a lot of work on her mental health before surgery, and she feels it's made a world of difference in her ability to cope post-op. So that's lovely. Justine said that she was struggling a bit with food noise and hunger. Hormones kick back in, and it's been a real mental game for her, but she is now on a low level GLP-1, which has helped control some of that while working with a counsellor as well. But she asked, can you explain more about the intrinsic factors like non-recognition of hunger and fullness?
Like interoception. Yeah, so interoception is the ability to notice sensations inside of your body. And sometimes this can be really hard for people. So it doesn't just include things like hunger. It can also include knowing when your bladder is full, or knowing that you're about to vomit, or experiencing emotions, because emotions are felt in the body. So often it can be hard for people to detect what it is they're feeling and then give it a name. So, I think with psychology, there might be some wiggle room for people to improve on this, but sometimes it's also partly the way a person's wired, and it really is a challenge. So that's really what interoception is in a nutshell. But it as I say, it doesn't just impact hunger. It's across the board, difficulty with noticing what those sensations are within your body.
Yeah. And then Marianne has said she's almost 8 years post-op, and over the past 12 to 18 months has regained 12 to 15 kilos, and she's feeling some old eating patterns breaking through, including like sneaky eating. How can I get access to psychology to help?
In terms of access, I don't know if that means availability or, financial access. I guess the best place to start is seeing the GP and maybe getting a mental health care plan. That's usually the process, or you could come privately through your private health insurance.
Yeah, definitely. So definitely seeking a care plan or private health insurance, and you can call our clinic reception team. They'd be happy to obviously discuss options and costs around booking in with Melanie for some psychology support. Awesome. All right. And Melanie, did you have any thoughts around like where you feel kind of self-care and stress management fit when it comes to weight loss surgery?
Yeah, I think that stress is a factor that exacerbates all pre-existing mental health issues, and even on its own, if there's a chronic level of stress, it can impact how a person functions day to day. But I notice that often clients use the word stress. When we're more curious about it, it often is a more distinct emotion. Once we start investigating and looking into it, it can be, sadness or anger or anxiety. And so I think it's really important to be really curious about that word when people use stress, the word stress.
Yeah, it's very true. I guess it's a broad term, and it's more, thinking about what is impacting them and what they're needing to support with. Awesome. And you did mention it a bit at the start around body image, but do you find like sense of identity in a smaller body is something you can support patients with after surgery? Like, is that a conversation that comes up often or not really?
Yeah, that's something that comes up really often. Many clients report that they're treated very differently now that they're living in a smaller body. And the experience can be bittersweet. So, they might have an experience of going into a shop and getting more attention than they used to. And then they start to feel sad because they realize that they were the same person before and were treated quite differently, and that they really were discriminated against. And so that might take a little bit of processing and understanding, and even, again, grieving, the attention they didn't get beforehand, and allowing them to feel whatever the emotion is around that previous discrimination. Also, although it's not that common after surgery, I have seen people with symptoms of body dysmorphia that I mentioned at the beginning, where, someone can worry about a flaw that's either minor or not visible. And in response to this, the person can sort of do repetitive behaviours around avoidance or checking, and it can interfere with how they're functioning day to day. But as I said, it's not that common to see.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I guess, like, do you have many conversations around like how it influences like relationships as well with people, in that sense of like being in a smaller body? Is that something that comes up as well?
It can definitely impact. People have all sorts of feelings about size, intimate partners can worry about the change. Will my partner still love me if they're a different size? It definitely can affect intimate relationships, friendships. There can be envy or jealousy around that, or judgment. So absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I do speak to clients about, like, it comes up as topics in my appointments as well. And yeah, it can be a bit to navigate. So definitely getting some support with that, I'm sure a lot of people would find really helpful. Lovely. Which, yeah, it probably leads into my next kind of question quite similarly, just a bit around navigating those like unsolicited comments. Like, definitely comes up quite frequently, like people, commenting on people's weight or how much food they're eating, whether it's positive or negative. If like a client or a person's feeling like those comments are impacting their mental health negatively, like any suggestions around putting boundaries in place, and navigating this.
Yes, I would definitely teach clients about boundaries, and I would give them frameworks to follow. I guess I would coach them what words to use. So, there's a few different techniques. There's one, I don't know if people have heard of the sheep sandwich, where, you put the two softer bits on the outside, they're the bread, and then the bit you actually want to say in the middle. Or there's more sort of direct frameworks, which I teach clients. For example, you can say, when X happens, I feel Y, what I need is Z. So X is the event, Y is your feeling, and Z is what you need. So it's basically teaching people how to communicate assertively, and just realizing that you don't really have to justify anything to anyone. They're your decisions. I always think that it reminds me of parents having a baby, because when you have a new baby, there's often a lot of unwanted advice. And so I tell people almost to imagine that they're like a horse with their blinkers on, how they wear these little leather blinkers, just to stay in their lane and almost hear all the noises, background noise. Take what you want from it. I'm sure there'll be some useful things, but the rest just background noise. And part of being able to do this is being able to regulate yourself and not getting too upset when people say things. So as well as learning boundaries, learning emotion regulation skills as well to go with that.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure. And yeah, I think that's like really relevant even to people's decision of having surgery. Like, the surgery has a lot of stigma, and it often sparks a lot of controversy for people as they're kind of deciding to have surgery. So I think everything you just mentioned is even really relevant in that pre-op time frame as well. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today. It's been really lovely to kind of talk through some of those key, I guess, topics that, when we think about headspace and mental health during a weight loss journey. We have had another comment. So Shelley has said, are there any books or resources or websites that you can share with us to follow up on if we aren't able to see you that are bariatric focused?
Okay. not bariatric focused, but more psychology focused. There's a book called The Happiness Trap, which is very much based on acceptance and commitment therapy and how to relate differently to your thoughts and emotions. So that's a large part of what I do. And that also comes along with an app that you can download, and a lot of that is free. It's called ACT Companion, ACT, and then the word companion. And there are parts of that app as well that will walk you through how to relate differently to your thoughts and your emotions. So there are a few resources that might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for everyone who has been able to log on today. Hopefully some of you will still be watching the recording later. But yeah, feel free to obviously reach out to myself if you have any follow-up questions. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon. Awesome. All right, see you everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.